Thanks for taking the time to join us for the June Housing Hive. Feels like we're flying through this year. We'll give it a few seconds just to enable people to finish up, obviously, inevitably previous meetings that finish at 11 and sort of join the call. But yeah, it's one of those topics again, which feels like we say this every month at the moment, which is one of those that we're having lots and lots of conversations with our clients about and contacts across the sector. And record numbers of registrations for the webinar as well. So it's clearly one of those that, is obviously has high importance because of the sort of the nature of it, but I think it's still one that certain organisations, and I think quite popular across the board, are maybe feeling a little bit not quite ready for it. Obviously, there's been a change announced yesterday, so we'll start moving through the discussion shortly. But we'll give it a couple of seconds, and then we'll get some panelist introductions sorted as well. I'll run through a bit of context and background. But yeah, just to begin with, I suppose good morning, and as I say at the start of the call, thanks for taking the time to join us today. Now, it's for us at Prodo, being a digital transformation partnership consultancy agency and solutions provider, we always try and base these Housing Hive sessions on particular topics which are presenting specific challenges across the space, really. So trying to leverage our position of having many contacts and bring people together to share best practice, but also discuss challenges and certain ways of navigating through regulatory changes, evolving customer expectations and sort of everything that goes along with those two things, really. And today, obviously, being the countdown to Awaab, we're not too far away from October now, where this comes into force in terms of the first phase of it. But I'll start with the fact that, I think everyone on the call here knows what Awaab's law is and the sort of the reasoning behind it, what's caused the legislative change, but would be remiss of us not to begin with, just very briefly paying our respects really to Awaab Ishak and his family, who obviously tragically lost his life as a 2-year-old little boy directly due to prolonged exposure to mould in his social housing property, despite, from the reports, multiple attempts from the parents to sort of have action taken as well. So this has very much come off the back of that, which has been very clear. We've known this has been coming for a little while, but what the law will introduce is legally binding timeframes for investigating and resolving serious hazards associated initially to begin with sort of damp, mould and condensation, and to be extended next year and the year after to sort of cover more compliance areas. But it's due to come in, as I say, October 25, so not too far away now, and does mark quite a shift from reactive repairs. And I think the goal being sort of almost trying to force the sector to become more proactive on these sorts of issues with the time-bound rules around it. And I think the sort of the view of it really is that it shouldn't really just be focused around just ticking compliance boxes like all of these changes are. We had a discussion about consumer standards a year on last month. It's more around an opportunity really to utilise the compliance to raise standards across the board, really improve conditions and ultimately, hopefully, rebuild trust with residents and ultimately place them in a sort of a safer environment across the board, really. But yeah, it will be introduced in a phased approach. I think clarity on what will come later following October in 26 and 27 will become more clear, more apparent as we sort of get closer to those dates. But the specific timeframes associated with this, which we all sort of believe to be the case after the initial consultation phase, most of you will have seen has now been updated as of yesterday and sort of changed after an announcement from Angela Rayner yesterday. So this is something which obviously everyone needs to be aware of and sort of begin preparing for. I think everyone's known it's coming, but the specifics are a little bit more clear now, maybe still with some uncertainty or nuance around some of the language used. But I guess just to begin getting into those specifics before we move into sort of panelist introductions and sort of open the discussion out a little bit further, is that the first one is that the investigation into a damp or mould report needs to be looked into within 10 days, effectively 10 working days. Now, those deemed to be significant, and again, that's something which maybe needs a little bit of clarity, the properties need to be made safe within 5 working days of the investigation concluding. And again, that might need a little bit of definition around what that means in terms of when the investigation concludes. For those cases which are deemed an emergency and posing immediate risk to the tenant, and I think in that case what we're talking about there is that it's going to likely cause health issues, usually sort of respiratory related, then they need to be investigated and action needs to be taken on an emergency basis within 24 hours. I think the wording is reasonably practicable, but in any event within 24 hours. A written summary of the investigation itself, including findings, planned action, must also be provided to the tenant within 3 working days, again, of that investigation concluding, which again is a sort of a definition question potentially. And I think an interesting point, which maybe feels a little bit newer than the sort of consultation phase, but if that property cannot be made safe within the specified timeframes, then what the landlord must do is at least offer to arrange alternative accommodation at the landlord's expense as well to the tenant until those repairs the required repairs have been completed. Now, I think in terms of compliance around this and what might happen if compliance isn't met, the regulator and ombudsman will have more power to act upon non-compliance, and there's talks of sort of fines and things being put in place. Obviously, with these sorts of cases likely going quite public, there'll be reputational damage associated with it, obviously, as well. Tenants will have more power themselves to hold the landlord to account and also to sort of drive towards compensation, probably through the courts if the issues are not remediated and have caused issues and can be proved to have caused issues from a health and respiratory problem perspective. Now, because this has been so public due to the tragic impact this issue's already shown us a few years ago, naturally, damp mould and condensation reports have risen significantly in terms of defects and complaints from tenants. And I think where we at Prodo are hearing and what we're seeing in terms of where providers are right now is that they're kind of in a place where everyone's wanting to and obviously needs to get to a more proactive situation to get ahead on these things, but currently having to deal with a very large backlog of raised repairs, naturally because tenants have got in touch with a direct worry. There is quite a list to get through, and I think a lot of associations are having to take quite a lot of time to investigate into these reports a little bit further. You request a bit further information, arrange sort of physical inspections, but also make the time to prioritise and take action on those higher priority ones. Naturally, some of them will be lower priority as well. But ultimately, we know that housing teams and sort of the sector across the board generally is stretched as it is. So it's one of those, as I say, which I think we've known has been coming for a while. But the more we discuss it, it feels like there's still organisations that don't feel ready at all for these sorts of reasons, just having to sort of deal with the backlog really. And that's the idea behind today. So what we're going to do is cover this, I guess, discussion in a bit more detail really. And we have 2 great panellists with us today who I'll introduce shortly. So Mark from Ongo, who is directly involved in service improvement around this area, Ongo, which is an organisation that's managed to really significantly reduce outstanding DMC reports, which we'll discuss with Mark shortly. And also Luke Beard from Art Consulting as well, obviously having spent time as a consultant working with many providers on service reviews, audits and sort of improvement plans around this area and others as well. So yeah, I thought now would be a good time, guys, to sort of bring you into the conversation and sort of begin introductions, if that sounds okay. If we could start with yourself, Mark.
So I'm Mark Tasker. So I'm it's a bit of a mouthful, Customer Relations and Service Improvement Manager for Damp and Mould at Ongo. Firstly, apologies. I'm not actually crying. I've got a bit of hay fever this morning.
Me too.
I might look a little bit puffier than normal. So I've been at Ongo for since 2021. Started off my career in lettings side. I moved across to damp and mould in May last year. So it's still a very kind of young journey for me, looking at the damp and mould side. And predominantly my kind of career before then was completely outside of social housing, more to do with sales and hitting targets and that side. So this is all still very, very fresh for me.
Great stuff. Thanks for that, Mark. Great to have you with us today as well.
Thanks.
Over to yourself, Luke.
Oh, yeah. So I'm Luke Beard. I'm an assistant director at Art Consultancy. Art Consultancy are a multidisciplinary consultancy practice that supports clients across a large array of projects and improvement plans across the sector. We've done some pretty extensive work on damp and mould, with colleagues being directly involved in the Awaab case for Rochdale. And also we work with a lot of different clients in terms of just service reviews and improvements around damp and mould areas.
Brilliant. Cheers for that, Luke, and good to have you with us today as well. So yeah, today, guys, if you're new to the Housing Hive, or if you've been before, we tend to just sort of open these conversations up between the panel now to just have a bit of a discussion rather than going down sort of a slideshow and PowerPoint based kind of route. So I thought a good place to start, Mark, would be, probably a lot of people on the call would have seen some articles and sort of news about Ongo a few months ago about the fact that you guys have made some real positive progress in terms of DMC reports and the sort of the backlog that you're having to work towards. So I wondered if we could start with what those kind of results look like, and then we can delve into maybe the sort of the actions that you guys took to get there. Because I'm assuming that a lot of people on the call today are, looking to hear in terms of best practice or some good news stories in terms of how people have managed to assist with this in preparation for October, I suppose, if we could start there.
Yeah, sure. So, just a few months ago, we were in a bit of a pickle at Ongo with the damper mould side. We had about 1,000 damper mould cases against a backdrop of about 11,000 stock, and we were seeing rises of kind of 60% year on year with new reports coming in. And Ongo had done what a lot of housing associations had done and completely taken ownership of every single damper mould related issue in the property. A very kind of risk averse approach to dealing with damper mould. And we had also really gone to town with how we address damper mould, with completing every single possible repair to do with damper mould, whether it was the root cause or not. And this had put us in a situation where we'd absolutely snowed our repair service with a huge kind of work in progress number, and things were starting to compound. So when I came in, it was very much a case of how do we firstly kind of try and reduce the tap of new cases coming in, kind of rebalance those responsibilities, and what can we do to kind of reduce those cases. So kind of new policy and procedure in place, kind of resetting those responsibilities with tenants, and engaging with our community voice to kind of reset those responsibilities. So what was our responsibility and what was the tenants, linking to kind of their tenancy agreement. So things like ventilation and keeping the house clean and tidy and clutter free. And we introduced a new risk rating matrix. So previously we'd done what others had done, and probably as soon as somebody mentioned damper mould, we'd very much kind of took them as face value. So if a tenant phoned up and said, "Oh, I've got horrific damper mould, it's absolutely everywhere, you need to come out and fix it," we would go, "Oh my God, that sounds like an urgent case. We're going to be there as soon as we can and get there." And then often we'd turn up and it wouldn't necessarily be as bad as what the tenant had described. But by that stage, we'd already kind of rated that case and acted. Our response was already in place. So we took a step back and said, right, we're not going to actually rate anything until we've had eyes on and done an inspection. And then we had 3 metrics for our inspections. So we rated the severity of the mould, the exposure to wherever the problem was, the mould, whether it was somewhere that they spent over 2 hours in or somewhere it was less, and taking into account household vulnerabilities as well. And doing all that, managed to reduce kind of cases coming in by about 70%-ish. But not only that, reprioritised the cases coming in. So reduced the ones which we said would fall under Awaab's law by about 75%. So it massively kind of reduced that influx of cases. Along with that, we kind of introduced a bit of a phased response to doing repairs. So tackling the root cause of that damper mould and linking that to the damper mould case itself. And if there was possibly 1 or 2 things, we would do the most likely one first and observe it, see if it fixed it. If it didn't, then go out and do the 1 second after that, to kind of have less repairs coming in from those inspections. Along with that, we did some education pieces with tenants. We've done like a Healthy Homes handbook with tenants. We've done social media campaigns. We've done explainer videos for tenants to understand kind of where condensation comes from, how they can kind of reduce that themselves. We introduced, which the organisation was a bit worried about, asking tenants to clean their own mould for the minor cases. And we were a little bit worried that that'd generate a list of complaints coming in, but it just hasn't happened, hasn't manifested, and it is perfectly reasonable especially for kind of round windows where mould shouldn't grow, to ask the tenants to kind of wipe it themselves when it's a small part of mould.
Is that one, Mark? On that point in particular, is that one which, again, you would only make that sort of guidance or piece of advice after sort of seeing it yourself, after maybe based on an image coming in, or like a photograph, or would that be based on a physical inspection? Okay, this is quite sort of minor, therefore you as the tenant could maybe sort of action some of this yourself. Yeah,
so again, we're based upon getting eyes on it. So whether it was a photo, whether it was a virtual inspection or a physical inspection, we would, if it was deemed as not falling under Awaab's law, we would ask the tenants to clean it themselves.
Right.
But if they couldn't do it, and if there was a reason why they couldn't do it, then we would still go out and do it for them as like a one-off, but explain to them it's actually part of their responsibility on keeping their house kind of clean and tidy. And along with kind of that support, we very much took an approach of whatever action we were looking to take with the tenant, where it's deemed as the tenant may be contributing to damp and mould, it would be done in a very supportive manner. So not enforcement route, but actually getting our sustainment coaches out to support the tenant with changes in behaviour or education or reminding of responsibilities or financial support, because we didn't want to deter people from reporting damp and mould in the first instance. So yes, that's kind of the main things we've done, and we've reduced, like I said, cases down now. So we're currently from 1,000, we're currently sat at about 300 cases. So it's kind of really kicking into action.
There's a few things in that, isn't there? Go on, Luke. Are you going to jump in there? Go for it.
All I was going to say, Jacob, is I think we're dealing with a variety of clients at the moment that have already got a large backlog of repairs and have probably carried that WIP for a long period of time. We know repair costs are going up. We know that demand on service is going up. And I think Mark made a pretty key point around recognising where your service is currently at and not ignoring the fact that this will create some additional demand. Yeah. And the way that you need to control that demand is by having an effective triage systems. And I think when we look at the legislation as it sits at the moment, there's a few kind of missing pieces for me when we review this, and one of which is those thresholds for intervention. So Mark kind of rightly pointed out around we need to know the severity of it, so we need to get eyes on. For me, at the moment, there needs to be something built around that we all do this consistently, because we all know that severity is subjective. Well, actually, we need to take some of that subjectivity away so that we can deliver a consistent service for our residents. And I think when clients on the call are starting to think about, well, how do we triage things? We need to understand that we may see an influx of repairs. We need to make sure that we're diverting our resource to the most appropriate and the most needing of cases, rather than sending them out, as Mark said, to cases which may be minor in comparison, but we've not quite got the triaging piece of it right up front.
Have you got any steer of that, Luke, from your knowledge of working through this, but also just from a compliance point of view, that there might be some sort of standardised approach to triaging and defining sort of the severity at all? Or are you expecting that to come? I
think there's an expectation that something will come.
Yeah.
I think if we look at what we've got existing, we've got an HHSRS system which is due to be upgraded or refreshed at some point. And I think what would be good to see is synergy between these different varying standards that we've got, HHSRS being one, Awaab's law coming through as another, so that we can really be clear around what severity means, what the duration is, what is kind of, how do we play in vulnerabilities, because they're all key ingredients in ensuring that we can get the right resource to the properties in time.
Absolutely, yeah. Great stuff. Thanks for that, guys. And thanks for talking through that sort of summary, Mark, from Ongo's point of view as well. It's it goes to show, doesn't it, that it might feel like, certainly the first thing you said around that, I think everyone across the board was acting quite quickly, or as quickly as possible, to be able to demonstrate the fact that they are acting on damp and mould to every report, and therefore everything becomes sort of clogged up and blocked in terms of delivery then. So it almost feels like quite a strong decision to not go against that, but take a slightly different approach. But it goes to show that sort of decision-making process of prioritization first and severity first has had an impact, because the sort of the numbers that you managed to reduce it by there is unbelievable. But just on those sort of proposed timeframes then, in terms of what we kind of found out yesterday, have either of you got a view on, do you feel like they're sort of practical in terms of how you've managed to work through yourselves at Ongo to begin with, Mark, but also your point of view at Luke with various others? Do you think they're timeframes that particular organisations will particularly struggle with right now, or based on contractor management and usage and sort of prioritisation now, do you think it's going to be fairly easy to adhere to?
I think if you'd asked me that question about 12 months ago, I'd have been very, very worried. However, we've had the kind of 12, 13 months since I've been involved to kind of gear up for these timescales coming in, and we've assumed that the proposed timescales would be the ones that come in, and to be fair, they're not much different. I think as a whole, we have managed to put ourselves in a position where we're set up to pretty much adhere to those timescales.
Yeah.
For the most part. My only concern is the 24-hour timescale. That still, for me, causes a bit of a headache for us. And we'll probably need to think of some creative ways to get around that, especially with the introduction of the investigation is also to be done within 24 hours now, whereas previously it wasn't. So yeah. Yeah,
that's good. What about yourself, Luke, from your experience of looking into this?
I think the starting point for me is that if you listen to Angela Rayner's announcement yesterday, safety shouldn't be negotiable. So it's an absolute non-negotiable. So our starting point is that everyone in the sector, if we look at the purpose of why we exist as a sector, is to provide safe, warm homes that people can kind of prosper in. So I think our grounding is such that we want to do this. I think damp and mould isn't something that's new, that's just kind of sprung forward. If we look back through time, Landlord and Tenant Act 1985 Section 11 picked up the need for us to deal with damp and mould. The Environmental Protection Act 1990 set out the need for us to deal with damp and mould. Housing Act 2004 reinforced it under the HHSRS categories. We've got fitness for habitation, which we kind of got hit with a couple of years ago. And then we've got the regulatory framework. So I think all providers have always known that there's a need to do this. I think what this legislation does for us is it actually is very, very clear that when we're as an organisation and we've got competing priorities, which we all do, this now puts this squarely in people's focus that we need to invest in this. And I think from Mark's point of view, we've had this the consultation for a number of months, approaching 12 months, and organisations that have been proactive with this have started to invest in the service, have started to put provisions in place to make sure that come the 1st of October that we can deal with what we need to deal with. So I think if there's organisations sat there thinking, well, we now need to act, they may slightly be behind like a curve on this, ready for the 1st of October. But if we look at what good things we're doing as an organisation prior to this kicking off, there are good things in the sector that we do, and we offer good repair services to people. This is around just understanding where your current state is and where we need to kind of invest in those, enhance the resources that we've got to deliver against this piece of legislation. So I think, timescales, I think they're ambitious, but they're necessary. We've all got those, or spoken to residents that have had those horror stories where they've been waiting 6, 12, 18 months for damp and mould to be dealt with. And I think as a landlord, there's no one who works for a social landlord that sit there and say, that's acceptable. What this gives is a very clear framework around, we do now need to take action. And that should give us the ability to attract the right resources to deliver the level of service that our residents deserve.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, quite a lot of this, and we talk about this all the time, it feels like, but a lot of this points to data for me in terms of what data is currently held on your customer. It goes back to that knowing your home and knowing your customers point, really, in terms of how can you proactively identify the properties which may be at risk, i.e., quite simply, if it's a flat and therefore the property doesn't have a garden, likelihood is that tenant's going to be drying clothes indoors, and is that therefore a higher risk? What's the ventilation like in there? Subsequently, from a customer point of view, is there particular types of customers that there will be that maybe are less able to clean up and get rid of sort of minor condensation, damp, and therefore ultimately sort of preventing more in future. So, but I think part of it is the data collection piece. If it feels like if the sector's still relying upon quite a lot, these reports coming through from the tenants in terms of repairs or defect reports or even complaints. And things like inspections are still being done sporadically on paper forms and sort of having to be sort of managed that way very manually. It feels like it's almost too late at that point if everything's coming through from tenants. So that data point around current data on property and customer and the method of data collection to sort of prioritise and sort of address these proactively. I don't know if there's something that you sort of had to address, Mark, in terms of as part of this. Was there specific data collection methods that had to sort of change as you work through this, or even sort of enriching data that you currently have?
Yeah, so notoriously, I don't think we're alone in this, but housing associations are normally not great at handling the data they've got. And we were the same. We'd put in a kind of a CRM we were using to manage the damp and mould cases, which wasn't really fit for purpose, and it involved lots of manual intervention, and it had lots of errors on it. So yeah, we were in a position where that data was not great. So we are now looking to upgrade that to have everything under one place. So it's easily accessible, the whole business can see it, and it's easily to be tracked. And then we can get some actual real data on how we're performing, because at the moment it's, like I said, with manual intervention it requires to input the data. The reporting we've got at the moment is just not, I've not got full confidence in it, so this will give us that, which is coming out next couple of weeks actually. But I think in order to get to that stage, I think you need to deal with your backlog first and get through that, because you just can't get to the proactive stage unless you've got through kind of your backlog.
That makes total sense. That sort of change coming as well from a systems point of view. What about yourself, Luke? Have you seen anything around this in terms of systems or data collection methods?
Yeah, so I think the sector, we've got a lot of data. We hold a lot of data. Part of the battle is making sure that data stays relevant and valid. I think the things we're seeing, there's a variety of things that clients are doing. So I think Mark kind of just touched on it here around how to actually streamline our processes and capture damp and mould cases or HHSRA's cases or complaints. How do we use our core systems, our housing management systems, to track those cases for visibility across the organisation and enable us to kind of follow a set process through, but it gives us the power of the reporting at the back end, so that we can understand what's going on within our assets. So I think if clients on the call are sat here thinking, how are we going to be dealing with this? I'd very much be advocating that we move away from a paper-based process and we try and look at some form of case management within their housing management system that kind of helps them kind of drive through the organisation. I think a key point is that this is an organisational issue. This isn't something that sits in a property services or with an assets team, where there is a need to collaborate across the organisation to get the resident the outcome that they deserve. I think in terms of other things we're seeing in the sector, so we've seen an explosion of sensors within the sector being fitted, so various different sensors being fitted. And we've yet to kind of come back and understand exactly what that data is doing, where it goes, what we can do, sharing, and those sorts of things. So I'd say we're quite new on the journey with that. There's a lot of systems in the marketplace, and ARC have got one, and this isn't a sales pitch, but almost it will take your property characteristics and it can predict where you're most likely to get damp and mould issues coming through from issue just due to sort of construction form or previous repair cause, those sorts of things. So there's systems that take your data and will risk profile your stock. And I think the other kind of key point on this, Jacob, is just around those vulnerability indicators in your stock. So again, clients are in different positions with where they record their data, how they record their data, how they update their data. But if we really want to tailor a service to our customers, then it would be great if that again is pushed up the agenda in terms of your digital strategy. How do we make sure we really understand our residents and then how can we use that to its full potential to support them to make sure they've got that tenancy sustainment and they can live safe and well within their property. So kind of a couple of different things there, but I think there's definitely this sort of data-driven risk profiling that fits into two pots. One is around vulnerabilities and customers, and then the other is just looking at the physical form. And that can kind of shape how you deliver your services moving forward, such as stock condition surveys and those sorts of things.
Absolutely. And I suppose, and I know we said at the very beginning, it shouldn't just be about ticking compliantary boxes here, but it should be sort of about raising standards and ultimately getting to that place of safe homes for people. But I think if you're able to do that in terms of what you just described there, Luke, and also the changes you're making, Mark, it puts you in a situation as an organisation, doesn't it, where there's quite a clear sort of audit trail of what's happened and when and for who, and then that data then sort of feeds into sort of proof and sort of, I guess, backup for organisations when it does come to maybe reports or investigations from the likes of the regulator and ombudsman and those sorts of things.
I think it also, just another point, I think what it also enables you to do, Jacob, is when you start to understand how you're going to engage with your residents around damp and mould, how are we going to actually get them into co-design processes and procedures around damp and mould. If you really understand your customer base, even down to its simplest form, you start to understand how you need to get that message out to your customers. So if whether that's through different sort of easy read formats or languages or visual representation, once you start to understand what your tenant demographic is, you can really, really start to shape it. And then that really helps with the co-design of your process.
Yeah, no, definitely. It brings me on to the next question quite nicely, that, to be honest, because quite often when we have these sessions or just general sort of discussions in it, and part of it falls into, we need to sort of educate tenants, or we need to bring them on board, or we need to raise awareness with our customer base. We usually get the question to us at Prodo of, okay, talk to us about successful methods of doing that, or any success stories that you've had around organisations bringing tenants on this journey, or raising awareness across the customer base, because each and every one, in terms of customer segments, will have their own preferences of engagement. So is there anything from your point of view, to begin with, Mark, that you did at Ongo around that sort of tenant education piece? Specifically, I know you mentioned a particular sort of support team over there, but on social media campaigns and things, but were there some methods that work better than others? Any sort of feedback on that question?
Yeah, we had a kind of multi kind of string approach to engaging with tenants. So yes, we did the social media campaigns. We'd updated our website. We'd create some content, like explainer videos for damp and mould. We'd also gone out to our community voice to get their input into our policies and procedures, and to get their sign off on how our policies and procedures work, and kind of took their feedback on board. So included that too. I would say that probably the best feedback we got was community voice. And the best engagement we got was from community voice, because they each either had or knew somebody who'd had damp and mould or previous repairs outstanding. And it really kind of gave us their perspective as we were kind of building that procedure to kind of tackle that damp and mould.
Right, yeah. Anything from you, Luke, on that point? Thanks for that, Mark.
I think just in terms of sort of best practices that we're seeing with the clients are kind of deploying, obviously we've got the sort of clear and accessible communication piece that we've just discussed, so making sure that we can meet the diverse needs of our residents. I think there's kind of other things that I'm seeing clients doing around sort of visible signposting, so a lot of QR codes that take people off to videos that can be sent out, can be left on boilers, can be put where they need to be put, so that customers have kind of got it accessible when they need it, which is kind of what we all expect in this day and age. A lot of customers are doing work with their tenant portal. So Mark touched on it earlier. So how can we get people to kind of self-diagnose through a tenant portal if that's their method of choice, and make sure we still get the information that we need to effectively triage what the issue is. So photographs and the like. I think there's a big piece in here around IT. So making sure that we've got some sort of way of sort of see it, snap it, report it type system for our staff around apps, making sure that that kind of comes back in through to that centralized sort of case management system. I think that the big thing is for me is around co-design, and that's making sure that we do involve residents in what we're doing, and we empower them to help us make decisions on the best way to deliver the service for them. And that needs obviously a lot of education for residents and staff. But you need to go out, and this isn't a one size fits all. To coin a cliche, I think Mark's obviously found success with his resident voice group, but it could be roadshows, it could be hitting pockets of estates where you've got a high risk of damp and mould, and having the right people on the patch looking at those issues or being accessible for people. So I think, it is around that accessibility. It's around getting the message out to residents to say, come at us, we want to understand what your issues are around damp and mould, but we've got this process that says we're going to triage this so that we can effectively deploy our resources. So we're not going out and wiping a tiny bit of mould in the bottom of a double glazed unit. We're dealing with the highest risk cases on a need by need basis.
Yeah, I guess on your point around the sort of digital methods around that, and again, to your point from earlier, it's not me trying to come across as a sales pitch here at all, but just from our experience at Prodo in terms of sort of having a tenant portal app and portal product available, it did kind of spark us to make a few changes to our product because notifications became obviously more important in terms of keeping people up to date with what's going on and letting them sort of receive updates without having to go away and log in and things. But also that data collection piece as well. So one of the areas where the Awaab shout case fell down was potentially communication and sort of language barriers, which obviously there's not much excuse for these days, but that was one point within there. So rather than just sort of having to rely upon your sort of customer facing tech to be English first speaking only, we ended up putting a change in place where natural language processing was incorporated, which can be multilingual in terms of people that don't have sort of English as first language to get in touch with these sorts of things can still use methods that sort of align with their preferences without having to be forced down a certain route, which is offline or another route that's less efficient just because of the language they speak as well. So it's one of those which I think has driven quite a lot of change generally. But just on that sort of digital platform point then, and I suppose separate to the customer interface piece, we're having quite a lot of conversations at Prodo at the moment with obviously organisations of specific sizes, because some orgs use contractors more than others due to sort of size and complexity and maybe geographical spread as well. But is there worries that you're hearing about in terms of contractor management around this? Because addressing these issues within the specific timeframes, a lot of the reliance on that will be successful and efficient and effective contractors as well. So is there any worries around that from you guys at Ongo, Mark, or anything you're hearing, Luke, around contractor management queries or concerns?
Contractors are always something that needs kind of close attention throughout the process. We're lucky we've got a reasonable sized DLO to kind of deal with repairs. So the contractors tend to be used where it's more of a complex repair issue that would require kind of multiple trades to be sent out with multiple different appointments, which is difficult to schedule all at the same time for what we do. So that's when we use contractors to kind of reduce that burden on the tenants to be enjoying multiple different appointments. So it's we've got a designated person who looks after contractors, but we've also got kind of area managers who also look after specific works to do with properties as well. So it's as long as you keep a tight hold of that, then it tends to run smoother than most. Right. Unless it's kind of a no access case, then it can get really kind of messy.
Yeah. That's another question actually I'll come back to in a second. Go on, Luke.
I was just going to add to what Mark said. I think a lot of organisations that have got in-house teams have got the flexibility to kind of move the workforce to whatever the priorities are, and that's certainly something that we're seeing in the sector. I think the big one at the moment is a lot of organisations, particularly those with in-house teams, are looking at more of a rapid response team. So they're looking at safeguarding that resource to deploy. so they can really enhance the experience. They can get good training into that rapid response team that just primarily focus on health and safety related or damp and mould cases, so that they've got them there, they can deploy them straight away. In terms of the contract piece, yeah, definitely is something that if you're contracting out large volumes of work, you definitely would want to go back to your contract and start those discussions with the main contractors in terms of complying with the timescales, and not forgetting the smaller contracts. So we spoke earlier around doing some of the investigation works. We need to recognise that as client teams, we don't necessarily always hold all of the technical ability that we need to diagnose some of these issues. So although we want to focus on the big contractors that are delivering the works, the smaller contractors, your structural engineers, your damp and mould specialists that you're going to deploy, there's now a time frame on those guys to try and get out to these properties and report back. And again, so I would sort of suggest to clients on the call to review your SLAs in place with those guys. And if it's not strong enough, then look at your options in terms of procurement and how you can tighten that.
That makes sense. Thanks, Luke. Just on that point that when you mentioned then around, I think it was yourself, Mark, around no access. I think this is another part which isn't necessarily 100% clear at this point. But would you say it's safe for us to assume that if an organisation has attempted access and unsuccessfully, maybe once, maybe twice, maybe a number of times, that those timeframes within the law can only apply once access has been granted? And that's an assumption we could make. And I suppose a question for the official notice when this comes, but was that something that you'd assume?
Yeah, I would, as long as we've got good record keeping, which shows the efforts we've made, the attempts that we've made, and then follow it through with, we get our tenancy team involved to go down. If we absolutely have to need to, kind of the enforcement route to give us access to a property, we just need to see it through to conclusion. But as long as we've got good record keeping in place, then I think it's perfectly reasonable to excuse as to why timescales haven't been met when we can evidence that we've made the effort, but we've been unsuccessful due to reasons that are beyond our control.
Yeah.
Just to add to that, really, that I spoke earlier about some missing pieces to the jigsaw, and I think for me, statutory defence is in the guidance. That's one of the items that's missing. So, tenant access, force majeure, what counts, what doesn't count. All I would say at the moment, a lot of people are aligning damp and mould alongside their gas access policy. So, emphasis on good record keeping, making sure that we fix appointments, three appointment process, but more importantly, following up, I think. So making sure that we then, like Mark just said, getting the tenancy teams involved at that stage to make sure that we can evidence that we've done everything within our power to get access to fix the issue.
Thanks, guys. We're coming up to quarterly, so I'm going to jump into some of the questions that we got through the registration form for the webinar, because there was many of them, so we won't get through them all. I'm assuming we could probably talk about this for the rest of the day, to be honest, but this particular topic, we might end up doing a second session on it, to be honest, soon. But one of them came through, which was around, and I don't think there is, but feel free to interject on this. Is there a deadline by which we must return to a property once the repair work is finished to determine whether the issue has been resurfaced or not? I haven't seen a specific deadline around sort of revisiting once something's been remedied, or is that another one of the gaps that you sort of refer to, Luke?
I think it is a gap. There's nothing within the guidance that gives a statutory deadline. But again, I think we come back to how did we originally triage the problem? So what was the severity of the issue? Is there a vulnerability of the tenant? What works did we need to carry out? And I think if you look at that against other works that we undertake as a landlord, it wouldn't be unfair to say if you looked at this, you would want to go back if you've got a severe problem and you've got a resident that needs support. You're not leaving this for 4 weeks after the works have completed. So I think to answer your question, there's nothing within the guidance that says you have to go back within a certain period of time, but we are dealing with our residents here and trying to deliver a good service. And so it will be dealt with on a case-by-case basis. If that resident needs a bit more support, then we may be there throughout the whole process and regular touch points. If it's an issue that could be fixed because of a leaking gutter or whatever the technical issue is, we may go back after a 4-week period or after a period of heavy rainfall just to confirm that it's been completed. So I think it's kind of a case-by-case basis, but I would go back to how you originally triaged the issue.
I think, Luke's right. There is no kind of statutory guidance on this, but there was something which came out August in 2024, which kind of, I suppose, gave a little bit of guidance, but also muddied the waters because it wasn't included on the consultation, which was recommendations that a physical post-inspection should take place after 6 weeks of the case being resolved. That then later softened to a post-inspection, not with the physical aspect in there. So I think perhaps we may get some future guidance on this as we get closer with regards to kind of post-inspections. So we are going to probably do this on a kind of a risk basis and use a bit of technology for it as well. So things like text surveys, emails, phone calls. It's a balancing act of measuring, disturbing that tenant. Do they want you coming back after everything's finished to check on work? Or are they happy to receive a text or a phone call or an email to confirm work is completed? So that is something that we will kind of probably look at a bit nearer the date of October.
Got you. Okay, great stuff. Thanks, Mark. I see quite a lot of chat going on between everyone in the group, which is great. I think there's some ideas being shared between each other, which is what we've sort of put these webinars on for. So that's great to see. And there's a few questions in there which we'll come to shortly as well. But just to bring one more to the front, which came through the form. And I think we've probably addressed part of this already as we've been talking, but just to maybe revisit it or elaborate slightly. What impact do you think this legislative change will have on resources? And when this person mentions resource, they're talking about capacity with people and finances. And is there any ways that you've seen organisations mitigate these so far?
For us, we kind of reset our budgets. Today is very different to kind of 5 or 6 years ago. The outlook of social housing is very different. So we've kind of reset to a more realistic budget from the off. We've looked at data historically about damp and mould repairs that are raised, and we've beefed up our trades team by 10 to address the extra repairs that are coming in off the back of damp and moulds. Along with that, we're then also looking at kind of efficiencies. So how can we improve our service without that extra spend? How can we deliver faster service? And we're currently going in the process of changing to a bit more of a neighbourhood approach, where our tenancy team and our maintenance team have patches to work on. So there'll be kind of a lot of benefits with that, where we get to know our tenants better. They will see familiar faces. We will have trades who work on similar archetypes of properties. We'll come across very similar defects and we'll know kind of very similar remedies to put into place. So we should be able to identify trends sooner and put those interventions in place. It's a bit more of a proactive measure as opposed to reactive measure.
I mean, in terms of just stuff to add to that, there's not a great deal. I think there's a fair assumption to say that you will see an increase. And I think Mark's right. All you can do at this point is do some trend analysis, understand what your demand's been so far on service. We know from benchmarking that damp and mould interventions, sort of the average cost or range is between sort of £1,500 to £3,000 per intervention. So it is costly. So there will need to be adequate provision in place to deal with some of this. That being said, I think if you look at mitigation on this, Jacob, as a sector, we've been doing stock condition surveys now for several years. Most organisations have been doing them for longer. Where we're getting into properties, we're looking at this. So in some sense, there's a form of mitigation in that we've been in these properties fairly recently. So we should be picking up some of these issues. So that being said, it's not going to excuse the stuff that we will still pick up big cases, and that we know that will be a demand on service, and it will definitely cost us more money. And I suppose that's part of the challenge for the sector in terms of how do you balance, again, another competing priority against the ones that we've already got.
Yeah, against the already long list. Yeah, absolutely. I suppose the other thing to consider around that from a cost point of view is that, yes, it'll impact budgets, and there will be spend in areas that maybe there's been less spend in the past to deal with parts of this, whether it be digital platforms or otherwise. But the other part of this, which will impact spend, will be the fines that non-compliance will ultimately result in as well. So it's one of those which is going to cost money either way, I suppose. But yeah, I guess what you said there on sort of trend analysis is one way to definitely look into it first. But
I think it's the hidden cost as well that you've just raised. So I think there's for organisations that have not invested in their systems, there will be a need to invest in systems to get the organisation into the position that it can deliver the service that it needs to deliver. So again, when people are pulling budgets together, there needs to be an honest view of, is the system doing what it needs to do? If it isn't, do we need to start now looking at our digital strategy and budgeting for improvements in the future?
Yeah. And I think the stock condition surveys is one piece that we're hearing quite a lot at the moment around people addressing those in digital strategies, to be honest, because I think there's still across the board, and yeah, you rightly put that there's systems which maybe aren't doing certain jobs. I think just going with the nature of quite a lot of the sort of dominating pieces of technology across the space that maybe not moving on as much as some of us would have liked. But I still think there's still some of these stock condition surveys being done quite offline and quite manual, and therefore the sort of the trend analysis even around those pieces and sort of proactively staying on top of data accuracy is more difficult and introduces errors and things as well. So that's one point which I'll just add on to there. Quite a lot of the other questions, to be honest, are relating to guidance around severity level definitions and what specific hazards are included and those sorts of things, which I don't think we're in a position to answer fully ourselves at this point. I think we're still sort of awaiting some of those things at the minute. And like Luke mentions before, there is still gaps in this that we're still a little bit unsure of, but I'm sure based on this stage, there'll be a lot of questions to where this has been set, and more will come out soon. But one which is interesting is, we've kind of touched upon systems and technology and sort of audit trails and things already, but there's one question around expectations of record keeping, working 24/7, and how much detail should actually go into the tenant summaries that will have to be produced and sort of shared with tenants post. The language was once the inspection's been completed. Have you got any idea around those at all in terms of the detail that people will need to put into those reports, in terms of summaries?
Well, I think the proposal was pretty clear on what we needed to put in the summaries as a minimum standard, such as how and when it was investigated, any follow-up investigations needed, if a hazard was found, whether it's likely to pose risk or not, and how to contact the landlords. We debated what we would send to the tenants, and we've opted for the full inspection that we carry out. So we're not going to send a summary, we're going to send a full version of that, because that will also contain for us some tailored advice on how best to manage the property if that is deemed as part of the root cause of the issue. So we're just being open, honest, transparent, no smoke and mirrors, and just providing that full inspection to the tenant.
Best way, cover all bases, I suppose. Yeah, absolutely.
And is that a manual process, Mark, or is that something that's driven from your system that you currently use?
So we use Versa to carry out the inspection. So upon the obtaining the signatures at the end of the inspection from the tenant and from the inspector who does the survey, it will automatically fire off to the tenant's email address, or we'll send off for a copy to be posted out to the tenant. So it's we're just in the process of getting that automated. At the minute, it's a bit of a manual intervention needed.
It comes back again, I think, Jacob, to the point around having systems aligned and then understanding your residents enough. So if you're going to send out a report, does it meet the needs of the residents? Are we sending out a report in the right format? Are we sending it out in the right language? Is that the best way to get the information out to the tenant? Because this is going to be effectively a key piece of information that the resident's going to hold to say, this is how I'm going to hold you to account to what you said needs to be done.
Yeah, absolutely. And with that having its own time frame associated with the law, if those things are being done manually still, it just puts everything at risk in terms of meeting that standard. If that's a manual inspection, manual write-up, and therefore there is room for human error. There's room for these things to to not get done in time, it's just a massive risk, which I think no one can really afford to take unless there's, it's going to feed into non-compliance, it's going to feed into reputational damage and ultimately fines and things as well.
And I think there's another risk. I know we'll run out of time quickly, but that document will need to stand up to legal challenge or regulatory scrutiny. So again, there's a piece around QA and making sure we've got competent people who are conversed with dealing with this work in this sector, and if it is a case of the system sends it straight out, we need to make sure that it is written in plain English, written for its intended audience, not necessarily for a qualified building surveyor that will understand the intricacies of a construction detail or something.
Absolutely, yeah. Thanks, Luke. There's been loads of chat going on on Teams here, and I can see that there's things being shared between one another, which is brilliant. Mark, I think you have been asked if you'd be open to sharing that sort of triaging approach from Ongo, if possible, at some stage as well. But I think based on some of the conversation in there, what we might try and arrange, guys, is if there are people that would like us to sort of put together more of a sort of an open conversation session with those sort of involved people in the chat, and maybe some others who are on the call today as well, with us to sort of, I guess, discuss these ideas and best practices in more detail. We're more than happy to do that. And we'll also probably put another session on from a Housing Hive point of view as well to build on this a bit further. But we are very quickly running out of time. I say it's probably one of those that we could discuss for the rest of the day. But I just wanted to quickly touch on before we finish that yes, we will be having another session next month. Next month, we're going to be focusing on the role of social housing with regards to tackling homelessness as well. So that'll be 24th of July, or a week earlier than usual. So we'll be discussing that on the July session. Sounds like we're getting some good feedback in terms of people being open to that open session. So we'll collaborate on this internally, get back in touch with you all to set that meeting up. But yeah, just wanted to thank you all for taking the time to join us today to listen through. Hopefully it provided some insights into obviously the changes that were announced yesterday, some really interesting best practices and sort of good news stories and best practice stories from Mark at Ongo, but also Luke's perspective from I suppose a little bit wider of working with many organisations on this particular topic, service reviews and service improvements on this particular area of damp and mould and condensation as well. So hopefully it was useful. Guys on the panel, thank you very much for taking the time to join us today as well. It was great to have you both to I guess, provide those different perspectives, but both equally as valuable. And as I say, hopefully we provided the audience with some value today. So thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Any final thoughts at all, Luke or Mark? Really on the spot a little bit about the question, to be honest. Sorry, but
I'll let Luke go first this time.
Thanks, Mark.
Nicely done, Mark.
I think I kind of go back to a point I made earlier around if we understand what our purpose is in the sector as a landlord, we want our residents to be safe. We want them to be living in an environment that helps them sort of flourish. So safety is a non-negotiable. So the legislation, although at first read may seem a little bit sort of scary, I think it kind of it's ambitious, but it needs to be ambitious. It needs to really set the tone for how we're going to make sure that our residents can continue to be safe in the properties that they live in.
Brilliant, thanks, Luke.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. It's about keeping residents safe is first and foremost. Legislation is obviously needs to run alongside that. But the only other thing I'd probably include is just we always, especially with our new approach, we're always mindful of, we've got one damp and mould case in front of us. We've got, 11,399 other tenants and households, which may also require some level of service from us. So it has to be a measured and appropriate response based to the risk on that tenant, because you need to be able to see the customers that you're not directly in front of at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. Excellent. Thanks, Mark. I suppose one final point from us at Proda would be that, yes, we'll definitely put that open session on to discuss this further, but it might be the case that certain members of the audience would rather discuss this sort of one-to-one. And so between ARC and Proda, we're going to be offering a no obligation free consultation call to individuals that have joined the Housing Hive today. So we'll get in touch with you, a bit more information on that if you would like to discuss this sort of individually in terms of where you are right now and maybe preparing for sort of compliance readiness. There's certain things we can facilitate between us to assist as well. So we'll get in touch with you all about that session and the group session in the follow-up as well. But yeah, I just want to say thank you again and appreciate all the engagement in the chat as well. But I look forward to speaking to you all again in the open session. And yeah, if you're open to joining the next one next month, we'll see you on there as well. So thank you very much once again, guys, and enjoy the rest of your day.